going to say a little bit about what QQI, the QQI's next steps, and not just directly in matters directly related to work integrated learning or assessment in the workplace, but a little bit more broadly than that. So the first thing I'd say is, QQI is a quality assurance agency, and it's a qualifications authority as well. And assessment is critical to both the quality of education and the credibility of qualifications. So it'll be no surprise that QQI has a very keen interest in the quality of assessment of learning in all its manifestations. And we also recognize there's a growing interest in work integrated learning, in work integrated teaching, learning and assessment. Consider, for example, the attention being given by recent governments to apprenticeship and traineeships. And I think this is here to stay, and indeed the COVID-19 unemployment crisis may well see an acceleration in that. Assessment is beyond doubt, I think, at least from today's presentations, a critical success factor for work integrated learning. Not just in itself, but because in order to do assessment right, it's got to be aligned with high quality teaching and learning and clear standards or educational goals. As the speakers have demonstrated, there are multiple kinds of work integrated learning, and we're interested in them all. So we're interested in apprenticeship, we're interested in a traineeship, whether it be in FE or HE. We're interested in professional placement, but we're also interested in students getting generic work experience that isn't necessarily designed to give them occupation-oriented formation. Reflecting on today's events and the webinars that preceded it, among the issues that struck me, and they're not independent, are dealing with variability. Things vary as you move from one setting to another. The learning opportunities may be different in one placement to another. The support available for learning will be different from one place to another. Assessment approaches will be different from one place to another. That's just a fact. And we have to figure out how to deal with that. Number two, building communities of practice seems to be a really important part of all of this. Engaging the key actors, and that they would include employers, they would include education and training providers, they would include people that represent the interests of the occupations or professions or regulators, and not least they include learners. All of those actors in sharing ideas and in coming together to reach shared understandings and so on in relation to work integrated teaching, learning and assessment. Three, articulating and communicating professional or occupational competence standards, or more generally, what exactly you expect somebody to learn in the workplace. And we've heard a number of speakers talk about the importance of being clear about educational goals. I think supporting employers is important, and for example, through staff development, to enable them to engage in the issues associated with work integrated teaching, learning and assessment. I think there's probably something to be done on agreeing principles, perhaps key definitions and so on and so forth, to enable us to talk about some of these issues in a more meaningful way. With all that in mind, QQI is certainly going to continue to engage with institutions, employers, professional recognition bodies, learners, and other key stakeholders on the emerging issues relating to work-based assessment. in the greater context of work integrated learning, to build on the work of this year, to identify what actions we might need to take beyond what we're already doing. We value our collaboration with the forum in that regard. I'd like to outline some of the things that we are already doing that have a relevance here. As Geraldine mentioned earlier on, we published a green paper on assessment in 2018. This identified a range of issues for consideration, for discussion, for reflection, things that might warrant action by institutions, things that might warrant action by other stakeholders, including QQI itself. And we're continuing to follow up on that paper. One of the things that I think is kind of obvious, but no harm to remind people of, is that QQI has long been an active promoter of the use of standards based on intended learning outcomes in teaching, learning, and assessment. And we've heard a number of references to learning outcomes today. When we speak about assessment of learning, we mean quite precisely inference of a learner's knowledge, skill, or competence by comparison with a standard based on evidence. And QQI and its predecessors have long promoted the use of explicit standards based on knowledge, skill, and competence. And indeed, we have a role in maintaining the framework of qualification, which sets out the kind of generalized expectations for academic or educational qualification standards. And that framework continues to be maintained by QQI, and incidentally, we're currently in the process of updating the referencing of that framework to the EQF and the Bologna framework. Academic integrity is another issue that was raised in the Green Paper in 2018. Since that Green Paper, QQI's governing legislation has been amended to provide it with the power to prosecute people who either assist learners to cheat, advertise cheating services, or publish advertisements of cheating services. We've also engaged in a fairly extensive program of collaboration with stakeholders to help them understand their responsibilities in this regard. And we established with higher education institutions a national academic integrity network in November 2019. This is up and running and actively engaging on the issues. And while this particular network is focused on higher education, we would hope to have something similar established for further education before too long. QQI has had a fairly extensive program of engagement with professional, what we call, or what we refer to as professional statutory regulatory bodies, or PSRBs for short. To date, it's been mainly focused on trying to improve the mutual understanding between higher education institutions and PSRBs. We've currently got a paper out for consultation entitled Towards Principles for Accreditation and Other Professional Engagements. And those principles aim to reduce the burden of accreditation on both the PSRBs and HEIs, but also to improve the mutual understanding between the organizations. The principles are based on a set of principles that was developed jointly by Professions Australia and the Universities of Australia. And among other things, those principles address the alignment of professional and academic standards, and that's quite relevant, I think, to some of the discussions today. Another topic that we've been engaged on recently, that's been, I suppose, highlighted to some extent by COVID-19, is the blended learning guidelines. We've been running a blended learning seminar series focused on supporting QA practitioners. And the most recent event in that series was entitled Assessment in a Blended Learning Environment from the Humanities Perspective. And given that for the duration of COVID-19, there'll be a lot more, and probably well into the future, I would imagine, that we're going to see an awful lot more people involved in e-working. The assessment of is online assessment, and assessment in the context of remote engagement in activities is relevant, and that brings it into contact with today's topic. The final thing I'd like to mention in this brief whistle-stop tour of what we're doing is a green paper on the qualification system. QQI, as I mentioned earlier on, is a qualifications authority. It has oversight of the educational qualification system. Probably the most noteworthy thing that we do is maintain the framework of qualifications, but there's more to it than that. And we've recently published a green paper on the qualification system that contains, I think, a lot that is of relevance to the enterprise education nexus that's, you know, at the heart of a lot of what we were talking about today. The green paper has an associated technical paper, and they provide a framework for discussion about further and higher education qualifications, the qualification system, the standards that underpin those qualifications, the communities of practice that underpin those standards, and the learning pathways that lead to qualifications, occupations, lifelong learning, and so on. We launched that paper in a fairly soft way during the summer because of the distractions of the COVID-19 crisis, but we'd expect to more actively engage in that next year. So, you know, to cut a long story short, there's lots going on in QQI and we're keen to continue to talk to people and engage people, and whatever we need to do, we will do to support work-based assessment. I'd like